in the article, which is not a long read, it's just worth checking out. Just a few quotes from Tony Petitti and the Big Ten side of things. Certainly some that if you believe this is all heading a certain direction, you can take his quotes and go whichever direction you want to. Like if you believe him in that he wants, no, we're all still going to be a part of college football, that's fine. You can believe that. If you don't and you think that they're inevitably going to do this whole NFL light model, then there's certainly some quotes in there that could lead you to believe that's going to be the case. I'm curious as to how they set up bigger games later in the year, because just big brand name doesn't necessarily mean big game in November. Certainly, Ohio State, Michigan, you can guarantee that no matter what, that's going to be a huge game for you. But with Oregon and Washington now joining the fold, that does give you, along with USC and UCLA, at least a couple, if not three. I'm not going to give them all four, tremendous football on the field year one additions, but you'd think like two or three of those teams could be pretty good additions right out of the gate and be competitive, especially after what we saw from Oregon, Washington. Granted, a lot's changed for those programs, but those are solid pickups and how they blend in and how all of that works and how the Big Ten sorts through having so many teams here in these first few years will be fascinating. So yeah, I'm interested, I guess, mostly to see, like everyone, ultimately what the real goal is, and whether it's fixing college football for the greater good or fixing a new version of college football for themselves, which I don't think we all really truly know just yet. Again, it's the quotes, you can take them how you want to take them, and all of the other tea leaves that have been out there. But the bigger games at the end of the year, you just say like, all right, we'll put Oregon, Ohio State there. I mean, it's a pretty good chance that's going to be a pretty huge game, but is it as simple as that, and how do you do that around the league? I'm curious, along with the SEC and their expansion of teams, and even the Big 12. I mean, is that on their plate as far as trying to find competitive games? How do you go about doing that? I'm looking forward to seeing how all of that unfolds.
Well, all we do is win, win, win. Michigan on the chat room. Michigan, Penn State, USC, Oregon, Washington, Ohio State. In for a real treat. How will Washington react to the coaching change and a lot of talent leaving? A good program, and what made Alabama so amazing, and there have been other runs like others in college football, was year in and year out, it didn't matter what coaches left, what players left, they kept winning. That's the test now for what Jedd Fisch can do at Washington. And now can Kalen DeBoer continue what the standard was with Saban, which will be very, very hard because the standard was crazy. Now you have Kirby Smart doing that at Georgia, and who can join him? Michigan won. Can they follow it up with a coaching change? No matter how good Sharon Moore might be, can they keep that standard? Ohio State's been pretty damn good for a long time. Their standard, though, is that they haven't beaten up Michigan the last 4 years. So it's going to be interesting to see how these teams all mix together as they're now all in the same conference, or at least two of those conferences among the four, among the Autonomy Five.
Yeah, I think with the SEC, it's pretty clear that adding Oklahoma and Texas to what's already a pretty top-heavy lineup in any given year is just going to make for a bunch of better games along the way. And so that one, yeah, you're adding two pretty big heavyweights right there that year in and year out are typically going to be pretty good. And Texas hitting on all cylinders right now. Oklahoma trying to do the same and close to possibly doing the same. I mean, they're good. They won 10 games last year. Like they're still good, but it's just not quite as good as you hope it could be. So those two you feel like are slam dunks in terms of making the SEC more competitive. I do think that, I'm a little leery on how good UCLA will be, but yeah, I feel really strongly that Oregon's going to be good. I think everybody does. USC should be pretty good, but Lincoln Riley's kind of in a weird spot post Caleb Williams where you just don't know for sure, but brand-wise and talent-wise, they should be right up there. And, Washington's obviously got some questions, but that's a place that has remained relevant for a very long time in college football. And we maybe haven't seen them hoist a bunch of national championships, but they have hoisted it before. And they were back just playing for it last month. So we'll see how they kind of reconfigure that deal after losing Kalen DeBoer and bringing in Jedd Fisch. But Jedd Fisch is pretty good coach. So, yeah, I did balk when I first saw the quotes about how deep they were, because I had in my mind, if Greg Sankey had said that, I wouldn't have batted an eye, even before Oklahoma, Texas. And now certainly with them, you go like, yeah, they're super deep. Big Ten-wise, I kind of at first was like, okay, Michigan, I get it. Ohio State, I get it. And then any given year, I mean, you do have Penn State. We also should say, Iowa obviously is in the mix. Wisconsin with Luke Fickell how much of an upward trajectory are they on right now? They could always be competitive and been very competitive in the past. And then I mentioned Penn State. I mean, Penn State's obviously a team that you always bring up. But, yeah, you add a Oregon and a Washington and a USC to that, and all of a sudden, yeah, it is pretty deep. I mean, is Nebraska going to be good? Who might be a surprise? So, yeah, that should make for a lot better games and a lot more competition near the top for that league.
No reason for you to tease me like that. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Among the ones that we think are most likely will be pretty good, there always is somebody, and again, Fickle year 2. Rule year 2, although they got a long way to go just to become a bowl team. But, yeah, somebody will jump up and be pretty good. The SEC always has somebody that jumps up, like this year, Missouri, Ole Miss. They're hanging around with Lane Kiffin and then the addition of Texas OU. And will Texas bounce back with Elko? That's what's going to be fun. But I do also agree that if you play a game that's means something in September and you win it, it should not be forgotten in December. It should not like it didn't happen.
But for whatever reason that just happens. Like you know. So
and by the way, Florida State LSU is not the only example.
No, but it was the most
too.
recent one that when it was come down to Florida State played the teams in the ACC. Well, they beat 2 SEC teams. To book in their schedule. So let's not just throw that baby out with the bathwater when it comes to that. But it is that's the one. So the incentive for, at least in the old days, and now it's going to be different, but for Texas to play Michigan in week 2 was because people are going to remember that Michigan game the whole season long. Now, it is kind of shown that, you could remember it, but almost the early season games are made as an excuse and not as a reason when it doesn't fit the narrative of who they want to get in.
No, yeah, you can always. That was pretty good, but that was 3 months ago.
I was going to cut through all of that should. I mean, clearly it didn't matter because they didn't want it to matter.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why it didn't matter as much.
But if you're going to do what Tony Petitti wants to do and flood November while the playoff committee is regularly meeting with all these games that matter, you're going to flood their mind with those games, and then that's going to be kind of the deal. So as opposed to, if you had a front-loaded schedule as opposed to a back-loaded schedule, the people can tend to forget that because if and I think it did behoove Michigan, even if they had they lost a game early this year, it would have behooved them that their schedule was back-loaded, that the 3 toughest teams they played were their last 3 games of the regular season. That helps them because then people could go, okay, well, look, yeah, they may have lost one early to a good team, but look, they just pounded Penn State, they escaped Maryland in a trap game, and they pounded Ohio State physically. That was how it worked out. But if you have the front of down the stretch, you're just coasting, then people can be like, yeah, but they haven't played anybody since September 20th.
That's what makes the NFL schedule or how they set up the playoffs so effective, and I don't know if you could ever do that in college football. You win a game in September, it counts. Doesn't matter what you do in December. If you stack up enough wins, it's all about your overall win-loss record. And what college football wants to do is selectively decide which games were quality.
Yeah. Well, if college football, if it wants to, and we say college football as a whole, clearly not everybody wants to do this, but for those who have the opportunity to possibly go do their NFL light model, that is the big concern, the big wish, I guess, for opposing sides, then guess what you would need to do to be more like the NFL and what they are possibly doing in that little alliance. It's an alliance, boys. I'm not going to not let it be called that because they don't want it to be called that, but that's precisely what it is. A partnership, a tag team, you can call it a lot of things, but alliance is one of those words you can use, but I get why they don't want the stigma there. But if you want it to be like that, then this work towards having some, and I hate to say it, guardrails or rules in place is going to be the way to go because guess why the NFL is so competitive, guys? Because there are CBAs and there are, salary caps and there are things like that. And I know those are all bad words right now because the college football, college athletics model doesn't serve those purposes. But the idea or part of the idea behind a big break-off is that those with that amount of money and the ability to do so would put those types of things, I would assume, into place. Because, you can't have the NFL when you're playing by Major League Baseball rules where there's no cap on anything. So that will all be interesting. That'll come in time. But if you really want to be the NFL and have the parity and do all those things, I mean, you're going to have to follow some of what they do, right? And that right there is one of the key differences is that the way that they structure, how they put their teams together is drastically different. So, I'm interested. That committee, partnership, alliance, tag team will work on that, and we'll see what they say on the other side of it all. But, a lot of work to do.
In September, among their first 5 or 6 games of the year, Georgia plays Clemson, Alabama, in games early. Those games will matter no matter what happens at the end of the year. They just will. They will, no matter what, those games will be remembered no matter what in December, who's hurt or not hurt. Those games will matter. And I want every game to matter. And I hope that we can get to that point. But you're right. We might have to change the way college football is structured for those to matter. I don't know how they'll get to that point. But the game with Massachusetts, November 23rd, won't. It won't even be brought up. And maybe it shouldn't be if they're 11-1 or 10-1 or whoever they are by the time they get there.
One thing I will say about the Big Ten is they've never used the SEC scheduling model of like, oh man, it's so hard here. We need to have UMass and
they really couldn't if you think about it. I mean, because you had, that's what I was saying earlier about the depth thing when Tony Petitti said that when I first sort of balked at it. When I think of the SEC, if Greg Sankey says that, I'm like, okay, well, you got LSU and you got Alabama and you got any given year, obviously Georgia, and then any given year, Ole Miss has been pretty regular there. Tennessee has had a resurgence as of late, and then other teams can pop up. Florida, not recently, but obviously has had success in the past, and so on and so forth. So you typically have like a handful of teams that you feel pretty strongly about, and most, if not all of those, are at least somewhere in the top 15 most of the time. Whereas with the Big Ten, I do feel like they kind of let the Buckeyes really, and Michigan now, as of late, has returned to glory, but it was kind of Ohio State was kind of carrying that torch, and then you had a couple of teams that were also pretty good, but they were acting as though it was the same
like Penn
sort
State,
of
Wisconsin, or
they were good. Iowa, I mentioned them a little while ago, but I didn't feel like it was to the level of where you could say that and not be laughed away about like, okay, Ohio State's great every year, but come on, you're not like that deep. Now, though, with the moves they've made, there is the potential there to say that and have it really mean the same as when, the Southeastern Conference says it, because of what Washington or Oregon or USC and UCLA could be capable of any given year.
UCLA. We'll hear it from, by the way, David Woods Jr. On UCLA the week of Deshaun Foster becoming their head coach after Kelly left for Ohio State. I think it's great if there's more games, if those schedules are all equal, which how can they be, though, when you have 16 or so teams in a conference, because some are going to fall one way and some are going to fall another. Like there's a chance if you're in Big Ten, you might get Oregon, Washington, USC, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State one year, and somebody else gets like half of them. And that's one of the challenges, I think, as these conferences get larger and also larger.
There's a reason why when all the speculation continues on and everybody's fantasy booking and doing all that, which is fun and whatnot, but then you inevitably see what's going to happen with Northwestern and what's going to happen with, this team or that team that's not quite up to par with those other bigger brands. And I don't think that anything's going to happen because ultimately, somebody's got to beat somebody, and you're not going to just have a fantasy, super main event every single. I mean, you'll have a game of the week every single week on NBC, but to think that top to bottom every matchup's going to be a banger of a game, well, it's just not the way it's set up, and it wouldn't be unless you decide to. You talk about overhauls. I mean, literally boil it down to 20 teams who have the most national titles in history and the best records in the last 20 years, and every week's like a super heavyweight matchup. That's not what we'd be going towards. So there would be more better games in theory. There'd be better games and more of them, but there's still going to be some games where you're like, I don't really care about Rutgers versus, and they actually had a pretty good year, but I don't care about Rutgers versus take your pick, UCLA. I mean, and they're still going to have that type of a game. So, maybe those teams are good at the right time, but we're not going to have just an all-star lineup. But there should be more all-star type matchups. In theory, that's at least where both conferences are coming from with their additions.
And one of the narratives that will be built, possibly, is that, this conference is so deep that a game that you lost to somebody in November, you play so many good people, you're going to have one of those.
The SEC's been doing that for 15, 20 years now at this point.
Well, that's why we can't play 9.
Yeah.
9 would be cruel.
Too tough.
Man,
it's too hard.
It's such a weird thing because people buy it.
Yes.
to say
ESPN buys it.
Yeah.
People buy it, and some that know it won't get into it and discuss it because,
we're so good we can't play other good teams.
Yeah.
Like, we're so good, it's too much good. You can't have too much of this because then it would be unfair because we're too good, and it's unfair to us to make us play more of the thing that we created.
Yeah.
Like, it's madness. It's absolute madness.
It is silly, and it's always been a dumb argument, in my opinion. I think there are years where certainly you can stick your chest out more often than not as a fan of that league, and you don't really need to add that extra mustard onto it. You know, like everybody already respects the whole conference pride thing. I think it's turned out to be really ridiculous, and that's all their fault. I think that the battle lines that have been drawn because of the latest rounds of realignment, and I appreciate the Big 12 folks and the folks who stood up for the ACC or the Big 10 or whatever. I get having some level of pride in it, but I just think the SEC pride has made everybody think that that's how you're supposed to be in some ways, and I don't like that. I don't necessarily agree, and so part of that pride was everybody echoing the lines of, well, we're just so good we don't have to play as many conference games as everybody else, or it's different. It means more, you know, that whole bag, and yeah, I never bought that. Fortunately, though, here in a couple of years, it appears they are headed in that direction now that they've added Oklahoma and Texas and can have more of those bigger matchups. And who knows what they could possibly, I guess, add in theory before then. Although there's not really a lot of smoke there right now. We know that there's a lot of topics of interest going on out in Tallahassee, Florida right now. So who the heck knows what it looks like when they inevitably get to that 9-game schedule. But I will welcome that when it gets here because I do think it's long overdue.